Hey everyone, today we're talking about some unpopular opinions that I have about writing instruction after figuring it out myself and also working with a lot of teachers across the country. These three things are going to make a huge difference in the way that you conduct your writing mini lessons. And again, they might be a little unpopular, but I'm telling you, they make a huge difference in the efficiency and efficacy of your writing instruction. If you are like me and you've struggled before or even currently struggle with keeping your mini lesson to be 15 minutes or less, or even just teaching writing without getting interrupted, without having it be where your students are unmotivated, unfocused, they're not really engaged in what you're teaching, then this is the video for you because these three things make a huge difference. And they also make it so that you can streamline your writing instruction and make it more engaging. Number one, I know I'm going to get shade in the comments for this, but it's note taking. So we all know that note taking is important, it has a purpose, but with our students really struggling with writing already, note taking is something that sucks up time, gets students disengaged because they're focused and stressed out on trying to copy down everything that you're writing. It's just difficult. It's difficult in all the subject areas, but when you're bringing it into writing instruction, it makes it even more difficult. And I know that this is, again, not a popular opinion, but especially with my special education students, my English language learners, and even my on grade level students, a lot of them struggle to take notes. And even my gifted students get so stressed out when we have note taking because they want to make sure everything is perfect. And so I think that this is a good thing to not do in your writing instruction for all of your students. So let's talk about what to do instead. So instead of doing note taking, you want to engage all of your students so they're participating while you're writing your model and they're actively giving ideas, responding to prompting. And then when you're finished with it, either keep it up front if you're doing an anchor chart, keep it displayed if you're displaying it digitally, or have a copy next to them when they get to their writing. And this can be really easily done, especially if you are pre-planning things. So you might not incorporate everything into that model that your students tell you if everything's pre-planned, but at least they have the model in front of them so that they can do their work. For me, I love to use anchor charts, and so an anchor chart is a great way for students to be able to easily see the writing, and they also can get up during their writing time, check it out, I always encourage them to bring their writing piece or their notebooks or whatever they have with them over to the example, and they can write notes or they can complete their portion of it while they're sitting next to it. Some students don't need it, but the ones that do, I always encourage them to use that example. Okay, so number two is having students work on more than one concept during your mini lesson and during their student writing time. So when you're teaching your mini lesson, you should be picking one very bite-sized piece of the writing process. So you should not be writing an entire introduction paragraph, especially in the lower grade levels. So if you're talking about third grade, those students are still struggling with paragraph writing. So you're definitely not going to do all of that in one step. Even in fifth grade, I liked to break it up into different parts of the introduction paragraph. My students really needed that. So in order to keep your mini lesson mini and to make sure that your students retain the information you're teaching, you need to choose one bite-sized piece of the writing process. So this can be unpopular because a lot of times we try to fit into 5 days all of our writing instruction for one writing piece, but that doesn't really give us time to properly teach everything, to do revision, to do proper editing, to do feedback, and actually learn every little tiny nuance of the writing type. So I stretch my writing pieces out to 2 to 3 weeks, and I split things up as small as possible. Now, I may plan to only spend 2 weeks on a writing type, but we get into it and I notice my students have a lot of holes in what they've already know about the writing type and what they're actually doing in their writing. And so we might just kind of halt our lessons, and I might reteach a small part of it, and that might add time to it. On the other hand, sometimes I notice that my students are, especially further on into the school year, are doing better at one part of the writing process, something, let's say, like transitions, because we've practiced it so much. Then I can speed up through that and I can focus on something else or shorten that time. So it's really important to have that bite-sized piece for each lesson, but also make sure to modify your lessons so that you're not necessarily doing the exact lessons one after another without taking into consideration what your students actually need. Okay, number 3 is a great one because this is probably the most unpopular opinion that I have about writing instruction. And this is to not call on individual students. So I know this is something that a lot of administrators or teachers, college teachers, might actually cringe about. But this works really well for me. And as much as I love to hear my students individually give feedback, I was having way too many problems with students raising their hands in the middle of my writing lesson. And I would call on them and they would ask a question that I had already answered, which is fine. I want to make sure they still get their answer. Or they raise their hand to ask me when lunchtime was. And so it just wasn't working. Even the students that raised their hands and asked a question that was helpful for the rest of the class, a lot of the class was disengaging the second I called on that student. Because the second I call on that student, some students do care and want to hear what that person says, but a lot of other students check out because they say, oh, they called on someone else. Time for me to think about recess. So what I do instead is I make sure that everything in my lesson, as far as engagement goes, all of my engagement questions are going to be a whole group. So I can ask my students, hey, I put this punctuation here. I don't think it's right. What's the correct punctuation? Everyone think on it. All right, everyone say it in 3, 2, 1, go. And kids will yell it out. Some will yell out the wrong answer, and then we'll talk about what the right answer is. But that way, everybody is in charge of responding, which means everybody's engaged. Sometimes I'll have my students help me choose a word, and I'll say, okay, here are the 3 words I'm thinking of. On the count of 3, think about it. But on the count of 3, tell me, do you want me to pick this word, or this word? And I'll just label 1 and have it be like whatever word I'm thinking of, and 2 and have it be another word from the thesaurus for that, and 3. And then I'll have them choose, and I'll say, oh, okay, so it looks like 2 is what everybody is looking for. So it's really important to plan these interactions beforehand in your lessons so you know what you're going to ask. At least I like to do like 3 or 4 where my students are really engaging by giving me some sort of answer. But a lot of times I'll also just kind of go with the flow and I'll just stop and have them help me with something. So it doesn't all have to be pre-planned, but a lot of times I like to at least plan out 3 or 4 things that I'm going to ask them during the mini lesson so I can keep that engagement going, because when I get back to the mini lesson, I always kind of have a hard time coming up with what I'm going to say, which happens on video too. It's just difficult when you're not like sitting and focusing on it by yourself. So that's also why I plan my models in advance, because I know when I get back with my students, I'm not going to have the examples that I was looking for. If you notice that your students have a lot of questions and you want to make sure those get answered, of course, we should definitely answer their questions. Have your students write down any questions they have on sticky notes. So that's something they can have their notebook back. They can have a sticky note, they can have a pencil, and they're just writing down whatever question that they have. And then you can come around and answer those questions during independent writing time. If you notice that that's too much of a distraction, you can just ask them to hold their questions. And a lot of times they will remember, but sometimes it's just not important enough for them to continue to ask it. So I do have a system in place, but sometimes even just having a pencil in their hand can be too distracting. So you really have to tailor that to your class. So those are the 3 things that have made a huge difference in my writing mini lesson. If you have not watched my writing mini lesson video, I actually have a couple of videos that have really good information on teaching writing, but that mini lesson video is super helpful. I'll make sure that I link that at the end and put it in the description too. But it's really helpful because it breaks down what the pieces of the mini lesson are, and then you can use these tips inside of that mini lesson to have a really great mini lesson that's really efficient. and effective for your students. If you have any questions at all, leave them in the comments below. If you don't have questions, just let me know something in the comments about your mini lesson that you love or don't love. I'm going to make more videos about mini lessons, so I want to hear from you. And don't forget to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe, because I have more new free videos coming out, and I'd like to give a lot of free resources to go along with them. So definitely make sure you subscribe so that you can get notified of those. If you hit the bell icon, it'll actually notify you when I put a video live, so you can go check it out. Usually it's a really short video, and if there's a free resource, you can grab it in the description. I'm going to link some in this description too, so that you have some things to take away today.